Welcome to the Creative Coach Podcast. I'm Wade Kingsley. And today we're talking to an American friend of mine, a guy who I've had the pleasure to work with in the radio environment. But I've got him on because he's had a really interesting creative career. And I think sometimes we think of our career as very linear. We can only do one thing and get better at that one thing and get paid more for that one thing. But today's guest is an example that you can take some great talent and hard work ethic and apply that to any creative field. So please welcome to the podcast, Chris Petlak. G'day, Chris.
Thank you for having me. What an intro. I love that.
Mate, it's also customary for an Aussie talking to American. If I say g'day, you have to say g'day back. It's just how it works.
Yeah, sorry. Daniel Ricciardo will be so upset with me. You're right. All right. As if I know him. Okay. Try me again. I'll be ready.
Okay, you ready to go?
Yeah.
G'day, Chris.
G'day, Wade.
Nice.
Go.
There you go.
Nailed
You got it.
Yeah, that's annoying. Okay, great.
Chris, you're on air at 101.9 The Mix in Chicago, and you do the morning show there, and you look really young for your age, I'm just saying. In
Wow.
your career, you have done so many different things, and I've had a chance to work with you in the radio environment, but I thought it'd be a good chance to kind of unpick your CV a little bit and talk about decisions you made, opportunities you took, things that felt almost maybe even counterintuitive to people around you going, hey, why are you doing that instead of that? So I'm going to start at the very beginning. I know you went to high school there in Chicago. Let's talk about your first career, which was radio. Where did you start and what did you do?
Technically, I guess for me, it started in college at Illinois State. I went to Illinois State to study acting and writing. That was my whole plan. And I got on campus and learned that freshman year as an actor, you don't get to audition yet. And so I was in the cafeteria and they had a poster for WZND, Illinois State Radio, auditions, all are welcome. So I was like, well, if I can't audition over here, I'll go do that because why not? That'll be fun. I love radio. Why not? And growing up in Chicago, we have such a rich radio history. So I grew up with so many stations and I went and auditioned and they hired me to be I did weekend afternoons on the hip hop station. And the day of my first shift, knowing nothing, having no idea what I was doing, um, I had done like improv in high school and stuff like that. So I was just sort of applying that during the audition and I guess it worked or nobody else auditioned. I don't know. But they told me they're like, you need a cool name. So I was like, oh, okay. And so it's literally an hour before my shift and I'm at the cafeteria with my buddies and I was like, I need a name. And we were kicking around names and I came up with DJ Sparks because I've got really big teeth and my buddies would razz me all the time about how white my teeth were. So I was like, oh, DJ Sparkle. They're like, you can't be DJ Sparkle. So it became DJ Spark my freshman year at Illinois State. After I graduated, then having a degree in acting and writing, it's not like you go to LinkedIn or Glassdoor and the jobs are just pouring in. And so a friend of mine from high school who was a couple years older happened to work at the Mix in marketing and promotions. And he asked if I'd want to join the road crew and be a promotions assistant. And I thought, oh my, yeah, I mean, I get my foot in the door. I get to go hang out with cool people, be around music. I'm in, let's do it. And so that was my first job, being a promotions assistant on the road crew. And I started that in 2008 in the fall, September of '08. Yeah, I remember it well. Yeah, crazy. Time flies. And yeah, that was my first taste, was getting in the door at the Mix as a promotions assistant, handing out checks, chapstick and Nickelback tickets.
I
Yeah,
can guarantee you this is the only podcast in the world where chapstick and Nickelback are mentioned in the same sentence.
absolutely.
Well, I was going to say, so you got into radio, right? And at that point, did you go, oh, I have to leave acting behind? Or did you keep the acting dream alive and think, what else can I do with these skills?
So at the time, the idea was like, oh, if I'm a promotion assistant at the Mix in Chicago, I can go to auditions during lunch and, the hours are flexible. This will be great. I can still do theater. And so I was. The first few years as a promotions assistant, I was still doing theater in Chicago, auditioning, done a handful of plays. And then I did this improv parody of Twilight. So I got cast as Jacob the werewolf in this improv
Yeah.
parody of Twilight, right? And so at the audition, they kind of would give you it was based on the books, but we were improvising, working our way through it. So we had like touch points through the books. But during the audition, there was this guy that was auditioning to be Edward, and they kept pairing us together, and it felt like we were really working well together. We had this great back and forth, and we both got cast. He as Edward, me as Jacob, and so we did this. He was the vampire, I was the werewolf. We did this run of this show, and just pretty much instantly became best friends. And his name's Jim Kazira. And so after we finished that, he was like, "We should do a web series together." I'm like, "Oh, dude, I would love that." He had a camera, and we were like, "Okay, let's do a web
You're
series."
halfway there.
Literally, yeah, literally. But all of our friends at the time, as actors at the time, it was very common to do web series about being a broke actor and living in your apartment, and so we were like, we can't do the same thing everyone else is doing. It can't just be two guys in an apartment. What can we do? And so we literally looked at our lives, and I was like, well, my dad's a dentist, and I bet you we could film in the dental office. So that's like a set. His wife worked in a high school as a counselor, so we were like, okay, we could film in a high school. And then I said, well, I bet you they let us film in the radio station like overnight or on the weekends when no one's there. And we were like, no one else can do a radio station. Let's do that. Just thinking we'll have access to a set. And our management at the time was like, "Are you going to touch anything?" And I was like, "No, no, no. We're not going to touch anything. We're going to fake everything. The studios will never be on. We just need to be in a production room with a camera. Is that okay?" And they let us do it at the time. So we would go in overnight, like Friday night, we'd go in at like midnight and we'd film this web series we wrote and kind of improvised. And we called it The Jams. The premise was there's these two overnight DJs and they want to host a morning show. And at the time, we were just pulling from my experience at the mix. I was like, well, the morning guy does this. And the girl in the afternoon, when she comes in at this time. And so we created this little world somewhat based on what I knew, but also just pouring gasoline on any of those ideas and like blowing them up, 10 times. And it was really fun. We put it on YouTube and no one cared. And like each episode got like 100 views, but we loved it. We did about 19 of these like 4 or 5 minute episodes. And then my wife and I got married. And at the wedding, I remember that Jim was one of my groomsmen. At the end of the wedding, he was like, "I know you're going on your honeymoon, but I'm gonna submit the jams for this festival. You owe me 25 bucks." And I was like, "Okay, great. I'll see you later." And it was called the New York Television Festival. And what we did was we just took 4 or 5 episodes, the short form ones, and we just slapped them together back to back to back. And we said, "This is a pilot. We don't know what the rest of the show is, but we know it's based on these two guys. This is our pilot." So we submitted it. And then Jim went to New York, and I stayed and was a promotions assistant. I was like, I can't get off work, man. Who else is thinking about these Nickelback tickets? Come on. And so he went, and we won a development deal at that festival for the jams. And so I'm at the time, then I had started doing social media marketing. I had elevated from promotions assistant to social media coordinator. And so I was doing that, and we got this development deal. And basically, this company called The Orchard, which has now shifted brands a handful of times, and the New York Television Festival invested in us to create a half-hour sitcom. And so I'm working at the mix doing social media marketing. Jim at the time was working as a substitute teacher, and we'd get off work and we'd get together and we'd write the jams. And we wrote 4 half-hour episodes. So we wrote the pilot together, and then I wrote the second episode. And ultimately, we brought in two writers from Second City and IO in Chicago. They wrote the third, and then Jim wrote the fourth. And they cast it, and in a year it turned into this full-fledged production in Chicago. And we filmed 4 half-hour TV episodes of this show with no idea where it would go or what it would become. And David Pasquazi was in it, who's now been on Veep and in The Mandalorian and in She-Hulk. And Kathy Najimy was our boss in the series.
Wow.
And yeah, it was pretty cool. And she's one of the witches
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway, she's great. They're all lovely, and so we get to do this whole thing. And Michael Patrick Thornton is in it, and he's on Broadway now. He's in. He's going to be in Waiting for Godot with Keanu Reeves now, and we're like, he was in our show, and so it's crazy. So we do this, and then they shopped it around. And so again, like I'm still doing social media marketing at this point. I'm social media manager for the cluster of stations in Chicago, and they fly Jim and I out to New York, and we get to meet with like CAA and WME and all these. It's crazy. We're like, where are we? This is nuts. And ultimately, Netflix picked up our 4 episodes, and it was
So
released
good.
on Netflix, yeah, and on Apple. back in 2016, which at the time, I mean, all they really had was like House of Cards. It wasn't
Yeah,
like,
it was
you
like House
know,
of Cards and you.
yeah, it was weird. And
Yeah,
so we were at our friend's bachelor party the weekend that it launched, and we woke up early the morning that it was supposed to come out, and there was like an e-blast that went out to Netflix subscribers with our show. And we were like, "Oh my god.
what the
Holy
hell?
crap."
Yeah,
Yeah, right. It's crazy. And so yeah, the show we got basically it was a licensing deal. They put it on Netflix for 2 years. And so my wife's an actor, so at that point we were like, maybe we should take a swing at this thing. I felt like in social media, I'd gone at the mix. I was like doing the cluster, I was doing marketing, but I didn't think that they saw me as an on air talent. I had done
right,
some overnight on air work at that point where I'd run the board for New Year's Eve and come in at like 4 a.m. on a Sunday and done some public affairs stuff. But, it's hard at that point, at the mix at that point. The mix was like a juggernaut, like number one in the morning, number one in the afternoon. There was no reason for them to shake it up at all. And I remember thinking like, no one else in the industry knows of me as anything except for at the mix. So I think let's move to LA and just take a wild shot and see what happens. And so
so
we
so
did.
you literally moved to LA on, like, "Let's see how this would go." Yeah,
We didn't have kids yet. It has been a thing we'd always dreamed of, and we had saved a little bit enough, where we were like, okay. And so, yeah, in as best of the way I could, I resigned at the mix and at Hubbard Chicago, and thanked everybody and left on really good terms, which was great, and stayed in touch with everyone there. Which I think, if I had any note to anyone, I would say, don't burn any bridges in this
yeah,
industry ever,
definitely.
because you never know how things will come back around. And I think that's true in any industry, but certainly in radio, because the longer you're in radio, the more you realize everybody knows everybody.
Yeah,
And everybody's worked with everybody. Somebody was a weekender once with the guy who's now the PD at this day, and you never know.
yeah.
And so we moved to LA, and I went on LinkedIn and just started searching for jobs. And I found myself all of a sudden being interviewed to be the social media manager for Ryan Seacrest.
Right, and
Because,
for those that
yeah,
don't know Ryan, he's a big deal in the US, right?
yeah, yeah. So he, in the US, he started as he was a radio guy. He started in radio. He was doing mornings in LA, and then he got cast basically as the host of American Idol when they launched American Idol.
Mm,
At first, there were two guys, and then ultimately it just became him, and his star just rose and rose and rose. And so he's nationally syndicated on Kiss, and he hosts American Idol. And for a short time, he hosted a morning television show here, or a breakfast show with Kelly Ripa,
yeah,
and
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 largely behind the success of the Kardashians, right?
he executive produced the Kardashians and several of
Mm,
those other shows, and then hosts our Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve every year,
yeah,
the big, so yeah, he's a big deal. And all of a sudden I'm being interviewed because I was searching for recruiters, and I found this recruiter at NBC, and it led to interviews, and I interviewed for that job for like 4 months basically with pretty much everybody in his company. It was crazy. And I
wow.
remember one of the interviews, I was going to work for the job was for him personally. He had a radio team, but they wanted me to meet some of the folks from radio to see if it was a fit. And so I went to iHeart in LA for a meeting, and the guy who opened the elevator was like, "Hey, aren't you the guy on the jams?" And I was like, "Oh my god, you saw the show?" And he was
What
like,
a
"Well, I work
moment.
in." It was crazy. He was like, "I work in radio. Why would I have not watched it?" I'm like, "That is crazy to me." Yes, that's me. And that only happened one time, and it was that time, and it was great.
How old are you at this point?
Um, 2016, I would have been, uh, just about 30.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. So
just about
basically your
30.
career up till about 30 is, radio. You're following your interest. You're following your interest first into radio. You're following an idea in terms of the jams, and then you're basically connecting the dots because you've got people in different places looking out for you, and being able to say, "Hey, we really think there's something in this," and then you also putting in the work, but following your instinct about that move to LA.
Basically, yeah, and, the nice thing was, I think some of the things that stood out in terms of my resume at that point, the Netflix tag helped, the fact that the
Yeah.
show I think that at least gets people to be like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Mm.
And then for Ryan, I know he liked that I'd come from radio, and so the Hubbard name goes very far in the industry, and, being in Chicago was a large market, so I was like, "Okay, well, if he did social media in Chicago for this company, like," I that was a value, I think, in that process. But
Yeah.
ultimately, I was offered that job and I took that job in October of 2016. Um, and it was crazy. Like the first day, they were like, "Hey, tomorrow you're going to fly to Washington D.C. with Ryan because he's hosting the USO Gala, and we need you to cover it." And I was like, "Oh, okay,
Well,
sure."
this is my job now. Yeah.
Yeah, it really was
Yeah.
weird. But ultimately, it wasn't creatively what I thought it was.
Right.
Um,
Interesting.
yeah, I mean, he was lovely. He's amazing, and I only have the
Yeah.
nicest things to say about him. And
Well, did you
but
feel like you were sort of in a box? Like, basically, I
yeah,
have to just, it may be my idea or maybe someone else's, but the end result of this is I'm churning out a lot of the same.
he he has a business and a product just like Coca-Cola or Snickers or McDonald's. Like, and you don't really mess with the formula too much. So I know early on, a part of what they wanted was some comedy writing for me, and because I had some comedy chops, they were like, "Oh, let's add some funny into this stuff." And it was difficult because I had to go through a few layers before I got to Ryan. There were like several
Yeah.
steps before what I wrote would get to him, and so ultimately, I wasn't being able to send him or get to him on the day to day basis with my ideas. It was like mine through three or two or three other people's filters. And so on the days that I was side by side with him and I could write something and go, "Hey, what do you think of this?" Or I was thinking we should do that. It was easy and it was fast. And I was like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay, great." But once I got filtered, and that was more of what the day to day was. Creatively, it just wasn't fulfilling at all. And I was like, "This isn't really what I thought it was going to be." And so my wife and I at the time, that was my full time job, and that was a big goal: was get to LA, get a job, and then we'll figure out the rest. And this, I wanted to be in entertainment, and this job was that. So it was a really hard decision, and I battled with it and back and forth for a good month or so of like, should I step away? Should I not? Every thought in my head, like, what will people think? You're gonna walk away from this amazing Ryan Seacrest
Yeah.
gig, like that's crazy. But I wasn't happy ultimately because it wasn't fulfilling. And I still had the jams going on. I was still getting a couple meetings here and there because of that. I'd gotten to go to Comedy Central and meet with some folks there and talk about some of the other scripts I had and do that at TBS. And so it felt like, oh, okay, well, I've got other avenues that are of interest. And at the time, I was really wanting to try stand up. And so
Right.
ultimately, I decided I'm going to resign and I'll put some energy into stand up and I'll put a lot of energy into finding another job. And so I felt like, I quit right after it had only been about 4 months and I resigned 3.5, 4 months when I resigned. And he was great. He was awesome. Technically I resigned with the woman who was actually my direct report, but then he called a meeting with me and we sat down and he was really lovely and really cool. But ultimately he understood where I was coming from and he gave me some really great advice. He was like, I say yes to every opportunity. And that's why I have so many jobs now. But some of them worked out and some of them did not. And I had to make choices. And I think it's great you're doing that for yourself now. So, his advice was kind of continue to listen to that instinct. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
thank you. I
Great
appreciate
advice.
that.
Yeah.
And so I just started doing stand up and going to open mics and started to make some friends in that space and got introduced to a friend who had done some stuff at the Comedy Store, which is a world famous,
Yeah.
certainly American famous
Big
venue in
club in
LA.
LA. Yeah.
And they do a thing there called, they call it in the industry, you call it a bringer show, meaning if you bring people to the show, we'll let you get on stage and do your act.
Okay,
And
right.
so I'd have to sell like anywhere from like 7 to 10 tickets so I could get stage time. And I moved to LA. I've only been there now at this point, like 5 or 6 months, didn't have a ton of friends. And was just cashing in like every French. I'm like, oh, you should come see my show. Like, hey, come, I'm going to do stand come see the stand up show. And the only saving grace at the Comedy Store is that in the smaller rooms at random, like bigger name comics will just drop in to work out a bit. So like Eliza Schlesinger or Kevin Nealon from Saturday Night Live or Mark Maron, they would just like pop in. So at least to your friends, you could be like, you might see some famous people. And then
Yeah,
you'll
it might be
also have
someone
to
good.
suffer through my stuff, but they'll be there. But then in that process, started really loving stand up and was searching for jobs and had interviewed with a few production companies, didn't feel right. And, it was fine. But ultimately got this interview at an ad agency, which I was like,
Right.
"Oh, that could be cool." Like, I don't know.
Mm.
And they're called Liquid Advertising, and they specialize in video game advertising. So I was like, "Well, that's pretty fun. Like, I like video games enough. Like, I could." And the interview process went really well and was ultimately hired originally as social media manager there. And in my first interview, I will say my boss, our creative director, the first question he asked, he's like, I gotta know before we get into this. What's Ryan Seacrest like in real life? Like he's great, he's fun. And then we
Yeah,
got over that, it was fine. But you
you
get
can
again,
imagine that
it's
would
like,
come up a bit. Yeah.
yeah, it's on the resume, but fell into this amazing company that I walked in the door and the vibes felt right. The interview was great. And it's not that I really had the luxury of being able to, take my time to find a job because you need to have a job. I mean, especially in LA, it's not like it's an inexpensive city, and we had been really going through our savings. But at the same time, having had the experience of not feeling fulfilled creatively at a role that I jumped at, I wanted to really be sure. And I was really grateful that I took the time to find this place, and it was amazing. But I started as a social media manager, and then within the first year, got promoted to associate creative director because the writing side of it was amazing. We were just pitching all the time, and their goal was to try to create comedic ads because comedy tends to cut through in general in advertisement. But
Yeah.
with the video game world, it was like, we need to make these stand out and have fun. So it became this amazing gig for about a little over 2 years. I was there as associate creative director, just writing commercials, and I got to direct some stuff for like Sonic the Hedgehog.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty cool. We worked with some of the bigger games like Just Cause, and we worked with Blizzard on World of Warfare or World of Warcraft. Sorry, and all sorts of just crazy things, and then some crazy Japanese games and small Korean upcomer game, like just some really fun, unique stuff. And it was so creative all the time.
Yeah,
And I
right.
really like getting that many reps of sitting in a room and going, here's the audience that they're going after. This is the budget. Like, how do we accomplish this? And then that was every day. It was amazing.
Right, so it was really kinda specific about a goal. It wasn't just creating for creative sake. There was actually a commercial imperative to it.
Yeah, and I know that's one of the things that I remember the last time you were in Chicago, you were talking a lot about the brainstorm. It's like
Yeah.
it's not just sit down and come up with ideas. When we have a structure, when we have a goal and in a way create a box, then like, oh, this is the sandbox we can play in. Now I
Yeah.
get it. When you're at the beach, it's almost harder to be like, well, where should we build the sandcastle? Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. Where should we go
Yes,
over there?
sometimes I think the expression I've heard it described as the freedom of a tight brief. It's about trying to be able to give you that freedom, but there's gotta be an objective, and sometimes the objective doesn't have to be commercial. The objective could be, "I'm an artist, I want like to paint." Well, you've got a frame and you've got a canvas. What are you trying to say? The objective could be, do people get the message of what you're trying to say through the art? And not everyone paints like that. Some people just paint for the sake of it, and that's fine. But I think when you look at people who have made a career out of their creativity, even as a multidiscipline career, as you've just told us, from radio, acting, stand up, social media, agency, it's sometimes about trying to make sure that it's pulling you in a direction. And I'm assuming that's what got you back to radio, right? Was the pulling in that direction.
It was crazy. So, right in that point in the timeline, working at the ad agency, and it was amazing. I mean, we were doing so many cool things, and we did a commercial with Tom Holland, who's Spider Man, and we
Yeah.
did, Hannibal Buress was part of that. We did stuff. It was just just the coolest stuff that we got to do. And then I got an email one day from the morning show host in Chicago, and then our marketing director, and they were like, "Hey, we have this new VP of brand and content. His name's Jimmy Steele. He's looking for some new talent, and we gave him your name. We think you could be a fit. You should talk to him. We know you're in LA, but like, we think you should talk to him." I was like, "Oh, okay." And so one day on the way to work, I called Jimmy, and he and I just started talking, and it kind of felt like we just synced up right away. The funny thing was, I had gone from Chicago to LA. He had just left LA and moved to Chicago.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
we had the experience of being like, I'm like, so where are you staying? Like, oh, you should go here, go check. And he's like, and where are you? I'm like, well, I'm here. He's like, oh, you should go here to the, so we had that, but we just started talking. It was like February of 2019. We just started talking. And at the time, my wife was pregnant with our first baby, our daughter. Um, and so my life was kind of like I was on this path at this ad agency and I was loving it. Um, and the path was sort of, okay, I'm associate creative director. Ideally, the next step would be creative director. and then hopefully I can continue to build from there. But it's going well. I love the people. I love the opportunities. I love the creative. We had our condo. We were going to have a baby. Like we were living in LA. We had no plans of leaving. And he starts talking to me, and we would talk on the phone like maybe once a week or every couple weeks. We would just chat. And it was like real big picture conversations. And then suddenly, like, he would start to zero in. He'd be like, if you were hosting a radio show, like, what would it sound like? And,
Right.
oh, send me some stand up stuff that you just did. Like, oh, okay. I was doing a podcast with a friend at the time for fun. It was called Not From Here. We had met doing stand up. So we were doing this podcast that we would just tell fish out of water stories, just time in our
Right.
lives that we felt like fish out of water. And he was like, send me the podcast. I was like, oh, okay. He's like, "Oh, I watched some of the jams." I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." He's like, "Oh, send me some of the stuff you're writing for the ad agency." I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I would just send him stuff, and and he had been talking with our marketing director, who is still there, Dave Karwowski, who had hired me originally, about me and what. And so then I would call Dave every once in a while, and I'd be like, "Is this Jimmy guy serious? Like, what? We could just keep talking. I don't know what's going on." And then somewhere around the summer of 2019, all of a sudden he started to get really serious. And he was like, would you move back to Chicago and host a show here? And I was like, I would heavily consider it. Like, that would be a dream come true to host a radio show. And so ultimately, he offered me the opportunity to come back and host nights in 2019. And so, my wife and I had a large decision to make, but we were having our baby. She's from here. I'm from here, from Chicago. We're both from here. Our families are in Chicago. You know, Ultimately we decided, okay, this is an opportunity that doesn't exist anywhere else. And we're going home, and our families are home. Our friends are there. Let's pull the trigger. Let's do it. And so ultimately I accepted the job to come back as the night host at the Mix. And they paired with that being the director of digital content, which then took all the experience I had at the ad agency and paired it. But it was interesting. Like, the second I got back to Chicago, I think we got back on like a Friday, and he had me come in on Saturday and do a night shift by myself. And
Wow.
there was not totally alone. We had a board out there with me to show me how to run the board.
Yeah.
Because it was like all new to me.
Yeah.
Um, but Jimmy, in a wonderful way, has this history throughout his career of finding people that he thought were entertaining that weren't necessarily radio quote unquote people or weren't on the air and grabbing them and putting them in the studio and just seeing what happened.
That's
And
great.
so, yeah, it was crazy. And he gave me a lot of leeway early on to kind of learn. And he wasn't worried about the ratings at night. He was like, I just want you to focus on, get your reps in, get better, get comfortable. And it was really fun. But I immediately realized that I am much better when I have a partner to play off of and an
Right,
audience to
okay.
play off of.
And that's been a constant, right? Because whether you're with your college buddy writing, whether you're with Ryan Seacrest or the team in the agency, they're all very highly collaborative environments, and often we think of creative pursuits as a solo pursuit, but, your the thread line through your career has been bouncing off and working with people.
Having at least a partner to play off of and to listen to and react to and build something with and take a turn. Like, I just going at it alone was just so alien to me. Doing stand up, it's interesting. I was on stage alone, but I have the audience. So we're having a
Yeah, you've got
conversation,
that instant kind of
and I
feedback.
can
Mm,
exactly, and I can feel the way that they're reacting to something as it's building and go like, okay, wait, I don't know if it's gonna work the way I think it is. And so he started having me do our mixed new music club show at the time with Nikki, who at that time was our music director and wasn't on air, but we were working together. And it was like instant fun. And
yeah,
instantly I
chemistry.
felt, and so we'd have these air checks and he'd be like, you sound awesome with Nikki. And
Yeah,
here's you at night. And it's like two different people. And I was just struggling with that. And then, we're going back and forth, getting better, chipping away. He was giving me a lot of he was very patient with me. And ultimately, then the pandemic happened, and
right.
oddly enough, I was in Australia. I was in
Oh,
Australia on vacation with my wife, um, and it was March 2020. We
yeah,
got home like I want to say we got home on like the 16th or 17th, and on the 21st they like closed Chicago
everything shut
basically.
down. Yeah.
We were in Australia when Tom Hanks got COVID, and that's when we were
Oh,
all like,
right.
anyone can get
Yeah.
COVID. Oh my
Yeah,
god.
patient zero, Tom Hanks.
Literally, it was like, "Oh my god, Tom Hanks." Um,
Yeah.
so the pandemic hit, everybody went home, and I started doing the night show in my closet. And it was crazy. It was like this
Yeah.
weird experience. And suddenly our focuses had shifted. I was still the director of digital content. I was working with the social media team all the time. So I had kind of these two roles. That role kind of started to elevate when the pandemic hit because it was like, how do we connect with our audience? What do we do? And so I was doing nights, but voice tracking a lot of stuff, trying to just we were trying to figure out like how do we all do this remotely? And I think so many radio stations were doing that. We're like, how do
Yeah.
we do this? How do we stay live? How do we stay local? Because our audience needs us now to understand either you need us for the escapism of it all, which is wonderful. You need us for information. All those things are so important. And then about 6 or 7 weeks in, Jimmy was like, hey, I was thinking, why don't you come in with our midday host, Lisa, and why don't you guys try afternoons for a week and see how it feels? Like, we kind of have this, free play. Like, Cume is down because people aren't in their cars. Like, we're figuring that out. But also, from an opportunity standpoint, like, get in there and see what happens?
Yeah.
I was
Gosh,
like,
that I mean, and that's testament to having someone in your corner, right? There's this kind of theory that you've got a cheerleader or a supporter who's not just giving you like platitudes. They're not just like, "You're great, you're amazing," but they're actually being constructive with that. And having worked with Jimmy, he's definitely, like you said, a great talent spotter, but a great curator. He can kind of hear it in his head or see it before it actually happens. And your story from doing sort of that midday, lunchtime, afternoons, and into now being one of the more prominent people in morning radio, which is obviously a big deal in a large market like Chicago, is a huge credit to both you and Jimmy because Jimmy saw the potential and really advocated for you, and you've earned it, man. Like your ability to be able to take any situation and look for the positive or the upside or go, more than anyone, I think that I can think of will go, I don't know, let's just try this. Like, is this something? And I guess I want to ask you just as a closing sort of question is I think this is very common with people who've got improv in their bloodstream. There's a kind of premise, and you can usually draw a line. People who like improv either to do it or be in the audience, or people who really hate it and don't want to go anywhere near it. And there's plenty of both. But the common thread I see with improv people is this obviously the improv principle of yes and, which is how can we take what exists or doesn't exist and how can we build and do something with it? It's about ruling things in rather than ruling things out. And I guess just as a closing thought, do you think that has influenced your career decisions all along the way?
like, I mean, I think it's kind of a two part because when you're doing improv, when you're on stage, and I've done improv in groups where there's like six of us up there. I've done it with just a partner. Jim and I, when we did the jams, it was certainly just, basically playing catch or playing tennis, whatever you want to describe it as. But a big part of it is also trusting your gut and kind of in time building the trust you have with yourself to be like, well, no, I seem to be making the right decisions. Like, okay, cool. Like, and so having these opportunities put in front of us and when Jimmy gave me the opportunity to move from afternoons to mornings, and I appreciate everything you said. It's so kind of you, but it really was he he really raised his hand and said, like, I think this guy can do it. Let's give him a chance. And I know he fought for that, and I'm so grateful to him for it. And so when I got in there, I think some people, I guess in a way, you might think like, oh God, that's so much pressure. Like, what are you gonna do? But I kind of thought, like, I got nothing to lose. Like, I'm here
Yeah,
now.
great
So
attitude.
let's
Yeah.
just have fun.
Mm,
Like, thankfully, they were only ever asking me to be myself. They were never
yeah,
asking me to play a character. I was like,
yeah,
all you have to do is go in there every day, just exhale, listen, and be yourself. And if you do that, the rest is going to come. In improv, one of the things we always talk about when we do it is like, don't push, don't force something that's not there. If it's
right.
not there, that's okay. Just keep listening and waiting and respond honestly to one another, and it will present itself. As opposed to like in The Office, there's the famous episode where Michael Scott's doing improv and he keeps saying, "I have a gun, bang," and it's like, no, stop forcing it. And so I think it's so funny, like doing this little retrospective and looking back at it all, I gave myself the freedom to say yes and to say no to things. And I think that's very useful. But in saying yes to the things and then in allowing them to breathe and take the opportunity and see how you can build upon it, I really think that's a part of why things have materialized the way they have in time. And I really still believe there's so much more for me, for us as a morning show to do and to grow. And I still feel very young in this space and in this role. I mean, we've been on the air for 3.5 years. I would love to be one of those shows when they're like, they've been on for 20 blank years. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
goal. That's my dream. And thankfully, Chris Egan now and Hubbard and Greg Strasell and all those folks have been supportive and have, you know, said to us, You guys have the ball. We want you to run with it." So, or whatever sports analogy
Whatever
you
sporting
want to
analogy
place
you
on it,
wanna
you know what
get.
I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And so having it is a privilege that I do not take for granted, that we have the support to be able to build the show the way we want to build it every day, and to have that exhale and go, "Hey, we can create this together. Let's collaborate." A lot of what we do every morning, I view our show as like a long form improv. It's structured, but
Yep.
I'm kind of the only one that knows where everything's going to go. And Nikki and Whip are just sort of listening and playing along as we go. And I love that. That to me, it's like that's why it feels fresh, and we're all learning together at the same time.
Yeah,
And I
that's
and
great,
I know,
and
yeah,
the teamwork aspect is something that's really important, and I think whether the teamwork is someone in your corner supporting you or someone you're bouncing off, being creative together is a great kind of way to live your life, and, thanks for coming on today because I think, I really wanted to talk to you because I know your career story, but even hearing how you're reflecting on it is new to me and definitely new to people listening, and I think that, the commonality is not just talent, it's not just yes and, it's absolutely hard work, and you're a hard worker. So appreciate Chris Petlak, you coming on the pod. We're going to put all your links in the show notes or your socials and stuff. So please follow along with Chris. And can we see Jams anywhere, or have Netflix taken it down? Where is it?
yeah, it's not on Netflix anymore. We had like a 2-year thing, but you can find it on Apple TV and on
Oh,
Amazon
great.
Prime Video. You can find it there. You can find it on the YouTube. You can buy it on YouTube. I think it's like $2 an episode. I don't see
No.
a dime, but it's there.
Well, I was going to say too, if you watch it on YouTube and you're watching this episode that we're recording now on YouTube, you'll notice that Chris hasn't aged one day, which annoys me immensely. Chris, thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you, and it's really nice to talk to you. And thank you for all those kind words. That's so nice of you. We should do this like twice a week. I feel wonderful. This is great.
Anytime, anytime. Thanks,
Awesome.
man.
Thank you, Wade.